attractive for traders seeking stability and consumers. If the Fed does begin easing over the next 6 to 12 months, as many expect, then CD rates could represent a peak, locking in now before rates drop to offer investor both worry and safety and return. Long-term CDs come with guaranteed interest and principal protection, a powerful condo in an uncertain economic environment. They can be especially useful for conservative savers or those nearing retirement, wanting a stable, predictable way to grow savings. And if you're worried about pulling out too much cash, consider a CD lending, blending short and long-term maturity to balance yield and liquidity over time. Shop around for the best CD rates and locking in while the locking's still good. For more, check out bankrate.com. I'm Mark Cameron.
Oh, wow. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks to our friends over at Everything. Of course, our friends at Dances Media, keeping it still loud. We're back with another installment of Challenge the Status Quo. My name is Melvin, Borja. I'm the Executive Director of the Commission on Decolonization, and we are back for another round of decolonization discussion. I had a couple of things that I wanted to talk about today. I figured I would start with, I wanted to start with the Wonpat return, which is live last week. It's been ongoing. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the issue, a long time ago in the 1900s, around 1920, there was an amateur archaeologist. I don't even think it's fair to call him an amateur archaeologist. He's more like archaeologist enthusiast. So there's this guy, his name was Wonpat. He was a German dude who was enthusiastic about archaeology. And he was hired actually as a spy for the United States because Saigon was controlled by Germany at the time. And so, they wouldn't, Americans couldn't go into Saigon. But the German dude was like, oh, I'm just interested in these artifacts. He was like, oh yeah, come on here, take it, not to so bad. And so Wonpat ended up marrying a woman named Gertrude. Oh gosh, her last name is escaping me right now, but they called her Gertrude Alleman. Alright, it's a peach story. Gertrude, Alleman is like I can't remember right, I think it's Spanish. But yeah, it's not as the term as well, right? So Gertrude Alleman, who grew up in the CNMI in Saigon, he spoke Somali. And so, he came in and basically said, I'm just here in Saigon to check out the artifacts. And what he was really doing was collecting income for the United States military. But, he had to do the thing that he said he was doing. So he indeed collected artifacts from Saigon and Rota. Some artifacts, of course, were Pauline, and some other parts of the region that came to were found in Saigon. In addition, he collected a ton of artifacts in Saigon. And of course, when he came back to Guam, he went on an aggressive collection of archaeological artifacts, historical artifacts. He even collected rocky stones and human remains. And so, at one point, he had his campaign was very aggressive, and it's a well-documented history that he would offer little kids movie tickets in exchange for artifacts. So it's like all these little Samaritans like raiding the jungle for pottery shards, swing stones, and Samahi, and what have you. And so eventually he was able to broker a deal with the United States Navy, and they agreed to transport, to ship all of these items that he had collected. And these are thousands, like tens of thousands of items. I believe the estimated count was somewhere around 13,000 artifacts that were collected and transported from the Marianas to Hawaii and then donated to the Bishop Museum. And it was, very well documented history. So, there's photos of these artifacts being loaded up into military trucks, and there's a record of them being transported on United States Navy vessels, and of course a record of transfer donation from Hancock to the Bishop Museum. And so, for over 100 years, there's been artifacts at the Bishop Museum, including 3 license samples. It's a 7-foot. It's because there's, the Haligi, the bottom pillar, and the Casa, the capstone, and there's 7 pieces because one Haligi broke. And so, 3 full Rashi stones, 2 of which came from Guam, and 1 that belongs in Luther. The one from Guam one came from Verona, and the other came from Wonpat. And so, these artifacts are significant. And when they did their final count, I'm sure things were lost in transport, things likely got damaged and misplaced during the transfer. And so when the new bishop leadership, current bishop leadership, kind of went back in and started to assess this collection, their count is now roughly about 10,000 artifacts. And so there's been this very long history of the people of Guam and the Marianas, not just Guam, the Sinai as well. Both communities have been very deliberate about requesting that these items be returned to the Samoa people, returned to their rightful place. There were a number of different petitions. There was even a lawsuit at one point. Some other groups partnered with Native Hawaiian groups to try to press on district leadership and get these items returned. And one of the big challenges for the people of Guam is that we are not covered under NAGPRA. So NAGPRA is the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. It's a federal policy that basically lays down the framework for how human remains and funerary objects could be treated, repatriated, returned to their rightful owners. And so, this is kind of a very nuanced issue, right? Because museums all over the world, chock full of indigenous collections, right? Items that belong to indigenous communities that are on display for public consumption, and it's a double-edged sword, right? Because for a lot of people in the community, that's how they learn about indigenous history. Even for indigenous peoples, a lot of them see these items and are able to make these connections and learn more about their past through these institutions. But now there's been this trend in the ethical work of museums. And so, how do museums ethically handle their business and conduct their missions in regard to the treatment of indigenous collections and indigenous artifacts? So even like the Smithsonian, just a couple years ago, the Smithsonian had actually shut down this whole section of their museum because they're all indigenous, like Native American indigenous collections. And so they didn't know what to do with these collections, right? Like they kind of figured, okay, we have to do something about it. First thing we got to do is we got to shut down. We got to shut it down, and we got to stop everything, and we got to figure out, where did these items come. And so this has kind of been an ongoing evolution of conducting your museum business. Right? Museums are all about preserving history and educating people about the past and creating these connections to the past. But how do we do this ethically? And so there's been this ongoing address of how to treat, especially funerary objects and human remains. And so in 2000, 311 ancestors were returned to Guam as part of this ethical return. And this was the product of years and years, decades of advocacy by community groups, cultural groups, even government officials. When we were announcing the advancement of this work and this return, I actually got a call from a text from former Congressman Dr. Robert Underwood. He respectfully asked me to make sure that I reach out to FCCI9, and if any of you remember FCCI9, she's provincial and work. In fact, he worked with Congressman Underwood. And so he asked us to be invited to the ceremony at Bishop Museum because she was the person assigned to this when she was working at his office. Unfortunately, at the time when he was in office, we didn't have the kind of administrative support, executive support from the government at that time. And so, things kind of fizzled out. And that's one thing I got to say I feel like was a game changer in this current effort is the lieutenant governor, Josh Fenoya, made this deep commitment that he was going to personally get involved in this one. I'm switching my hat real quick here. I'm also served as president of the Department of Promoter Affairs. And that's, where the DPA has the legal jurisdiction over cultural artifacts and even human remains. Of course, we work collaboratively with the State Preservation Office, which is in SIPA. And they're the ones who really, SIPA is the one who goes out when there's an excavation or a new development. They are they're kind of the first one on site to assess whether or not there are discoveries, right? Are the artifacts that were discovered? If so, what are the artifacts? Are they historically relevant? Which era do they come from? Are they World War II relics? Are they pre-Latin, Latin period? But once they determine that, then they proceed accordingly. And so there are a number of things that we've done over the course of our history that have been built to advocate for the dignified treatment of historical artifacts, specifically human remains. And so, like today, for example, any discovery of human remains since 1980 will have to be reinterred in the place that they were found, or in a proximal site, like a site that's close by, that provides better access for the community to undertake the inspection. And so a good example of this is there's a substation down in Melissa, GPA substation, GPA? UWA, I can't remember, but it's right next door to the Santa Maria and Common Park. And so when they were doing their construction, they discovered human remains, and they went through the whole process with people. And the plan was originally to ensure them where they were found. But because, these substations have to be gated off, right? And right next door to it, like literally right on the property line of Santa Maria and Common Park. And that park is maintained by Melissa Mayor. And so the community there and with the mayor's office agreed that they would prefer that the remains are interred in the park rather than behind the fence in the substation. And so that's just from where they were discovered. And so that's an example of kind of a compromise or alternative to, how to handle human remains when they're discovered. Now, everything before 1980 was either put into a napkin, choked out, or in some cases they were removed and put into storage. And so those remains, including the 311 remains from the Hans Hornbostel collection, which, been in our possession of the Department of Criminal Affairs under the Guam Museum. Those remains will be permanently interred into the Napton mining area. And so the Napton mining area, Napton is basically like a sun, and mining area are ancestors became before us. So, when the legislature this last year approved funding to construct the Napton mining area, this will be a Department of Public Parks and Recreation's project. SIPO, of course, is under DPR. And so SIPO and DPR will lead the project, construct the Napton, and then DCA will work collaboratively with SIPO and DPR to inter the human remains into the shrine. It's basically going to be like a trip, right? And then, of course, build out all of the storyline, like the finance, the education, so that when people come to the Napton mining after, they know what it is that they're seeing there. And, it's able to tell the history of as much as we know about the ancestors that are there. The Napton mining area has already been written into law in terms of its site and the basic requirements for the construction of the site. It's over at the point, which is right above the Hilton Hotel, right next to Second Sister and Promote, which is delivered, right? When the public officials and our legislators went in and passed this law, the idea was they wanted it to be, part of it was they wanted it to bookend Suman Bay, right? Suman Bay, Taiwan is an ancient Komodo village. The entire bay was just chock full of historical sites. Utah Beach is a major historical site. That's why I've never wondered why, when you rent a pavilion there for like every kid's birthday party, you want to put up a canopy, they require you to use weights. You're not allowed to stake anything in the ground in Utah. The reason why is because the entire site is a historic site. Way back in, I want to say it was like 80s or 90s, I can't remember. But there was a discovery in Utah Beach, in the park, and it was popularly referred to as the Princess of Utah, because they found, human remains, and they found a full skeleton of a woman, a Komodo woman, who was adorned with all kinds of purple jewelry, like spondylus, right, which is traditionally Komodos. The women would wear the spondylus. Spondylus, we call it the Guam name, is representative of the full moon. And then the reason why the humerus, that's kind of like shaped like a sickle, is called the Sanahi, is because that's the waxing moon, the new moon. And so these are, male, female symbols, traditionally. And so this woman had like, spondylus belt and jewelry all over her. She's there with funerary objects, reading the archaeologist historians couldn't believe that she was the Matai, right, the ruling class. She's likely a Navajo. And so Utah is a very significant cultural site. But the entire stretch of Tuman Bay, was an ancient settlement. Or lasted on there. So every single hotel that you go to on Guam has an option. They're required by law to have it. And they're supposed to maintain it, provide public access to it, provide information on what was discovered there, what is buried there. And that's something that they're supposed to work with the Department of Criminal Affairs and the Guam State Historic Preservation Office to develop all of this information. So it's a very interesting situation for Guam. The entire island of Guam really is sort of historical in nature. I mean, Guam is always so big, and it's such a robust and old civilization. The Komodo people are like 4,000-year-old civilization. So, of course, everywhere you develop on Guam, you're going to find some kind of artifacts, some remnants of civilization before us. So, the human remains were returned to us in 2000, 311 of them, 311 sets or boxes. And then the artifacts that are roughly around 10,000 it represents 1/8 of Bishop Museum's ethnological collection. And that's massive. Like, if you've ever been to Bishop Museum, it's a sizable institution, a facility. You have a lot of credit. And to know that the Horn Bison collection is about 1/8 of the ethnological collection is amazing. It's a lot. It's a significant amount of artifacts. I mean, I was blessed enough to get a chance to view the collection, and it is staggering. I mean, there are like trays and trays and trays of flintstones. And they're all like tightly packed. Like they stand them up and kind of line them up. And it's just like tons of them. And there's so many variety and like variations of them. Different materials, different types of stone that were used, and they're just so beautifully crafted. Like, I mean, these stones are incredibly sharp. Some stones they're so symmetrical, they're pointed. Like, these things are good. It's like the ones they use for war. These are for taking down large moving things. And so it's, but there's so many other cool items. There's a bunch of jewelry, face strips, limit, lucerne, the adges, the adze blades, the key gun. It's like a flat blade that's mounted on like an L-shaped stick, and they use it to guide canoes, so they're also used as weapons. There's thin-bone spears, like spear tips. Oh, that was a gnarly one. If you've never seen the thin-bone spear, let me put you on. This is a fantastic photo of one of the only impact one that I've heard of. But there's a photo, a really high-quality image of it on Wikipedia. If you just look up the Komodo warfare and spears, you'll find it. Really easy to find. But this is one of the things that was fascinating me when I was reading this. Was reading about first of all, Komodo's concept of war. I always found it very interesting. Komodos really have a great value of human life, right? So, Komodos, of course, warred like any other civilization, but the concept of war was different in the sense that because they value human life so much, they didn't believe in like genocide. They believe in like wiping out the whole other clan. That's not their way. So Komodos would go to war with each other, like clans would go to war with each other. But oftentimes, the conflict would end when someone died. One person died. Or one person is like permanently named. That's it. Like, we don't need anybody else to die to prove our point. There are even records of, historical records of Komodos who were clans were in conflict with each other, and then they would kind of like pick their rep. Because these guys really were most scared Komodos in our clan, and they're gonna rep us. And then they go and like they compete with the other three. And it's a violent competition, but it's isolated to these like representatives. It's really interesting. But one of the things that is one of the very, very unique archaeological pieces is spear tips that were carved out of human skin bones. And so they would take the bones of their ancestors, their family members, who were deceased, and they would carve these like tags into their skin bone and sharpen them. And the skin bone is hollow, right? So if you get stabbed with one of those things, it's like it opens the wound and it's like a blood load. So you bleed out. Or you pull it out and it like has the scab and it's over here. So it's all over. Yeah. So either way, like you either leave it in and bleed to death or you like pull your organs out. And so like, the ancestors and then the...
I was thinking of a state of animals.
Yep.
I was thinking of
there were animals, like even still, like, weapons made, but these particular ones were made out of deliberately made out of humans. Even if you've ever read Hurrah's famous speech, and this is obviously debatable, right? There's this famous speech made by Hurrah. He was said to be kind of like rallying promoters to fight the Spanish colonizers. And it's highly criticized because the speech was recorded by the Guardian, right? And it was this guy that was here with the Spaniards. And he was told secondhand by a young promoter who was there when Hurrah made the speech. And so the criticism is that the Guardian wasn't there to listen to the speech himself, and he's the one who wrote this translation. And he wrote it secondhand. And so, of course, there's going to be some things that were lost in translation, lost in transmission. It's like playing a telephone game, right? You don't get it like verbatim. But, the speech has always been symbolic of promoter resistance. And, this insistence of a unique promoter identity in a place, right? It's connected to the place. And so in Hurrah's famous speech, he starts out the speech yelling, "Fuck my fuck," to the village, right? Which means wake up. Telling everyone in the village to wake up. And so, fuck my fuck means to wake up, but also kind of like to, like open your eyes, right? Be aware. Physically wake up, but also wake up your mind. And so he's kind of riles the promoters, he starts telling them about, I'm super paraphrasing here, but he basically starts talking about how, the Spaniards have brought them nothing but misery. And all of these, terrible things are happening to their people, and this is their place, this is their homeland, their unique civilization and the people is a unique culture and an ability, and we should fight for that. We should stand up against these colonizers and, show them what's up.
I don't know if it's paraphrasing, but it always makes me so emotional.
Oh my God. This one gets me pumped, I'm telling you.
Even though, some people may say that more like it's a freaking anthem, right? But still, some of it has to remain true. I mean, most of it is. And I kind of just imagine, I think the part that makes me feel like warm and makes me goosebumps, and I was thinking about the actual scene itself. Like, obviously, I wasn't there.
I used to do this all the time. You gotta know.
It's just empowering.
It is.
It makes me so emotional. Just imagining a bunch of our ancestors, the climate they've been helping, they've been doing, and now, we're like, what are we gonna do? And here we are with this speech. So I think it's actually super beautiful.
When I was doing when I was trying to get my master's at Melvin, we had this class on Pacific Islands history, right? There's one of these requirement classes that everybody has to take. But the professor was this guy, Professor Dr. Hammond. And, he's a highly welcome background, but he's done like extensive research in the Pacific region. And so, we cover like all the different regions and, kind of some major milestones. So, of course, when we get to Micronesia and Guam and the Marianas, this at some point just came up, right, the speech, and Spanish conquest on that. And so, I knew it was going to happen, like, call me out. And I felt it, I was like, this is a setup. Because I know that there's, of course, I was already familiar with the speech. I have this, my own, like, personal, emotional connection to it. But I also am aware of the criticism of the speech, right? So I knew that was going to be part of it, right? And so, it kind of pulled me up in front of class and made me talk about, like, what, as a promoter or somebody from Guam, right, what do I think about it, or how do, how do I interpret this? And so I talked about the same kind of concept that you're touching on recently. Like, yeah, it's undeniable that there had to be something lost here in transmission and translation of these things. But to me, it's less about how accurate was the translation, word for word, versus how accurate was the translation of the sentiment and the intent, and the situation, the context. And I feel like it's undeniable the context. Like, we all know the historical context. Like, when Hawaii was alive at that time, it's very well documented what promoters were going through, and what their relations were with the Spanish at that time. And of course, a lot of people are human beings, right? So we're complex, just like any other civilization. And so, of course, some people, I'm sure, were very resistant and skeptical of the Spanish, and some people maybe were more welcoming and friendly. And we know that, we see the different parts of that history, and the way that it's told, for that era. And so, especially, a lot of people are very aware of the famous Magalahi Kapua the first. Right? Chief Kapua was famous for being this, a broker of peace, right? He's the first promoter to give land to the Spanish to build the cathedral. Kapua is buried under the cathedral, Yeah, totally buried under the cathedral. And there's a cool short minutes for the digression, but this is a cool story. Yeah, no problem. So Kapua was buried underneath the cathedral, and of course, he's famous for kind of being friendly, right, for the Spanish, defending them and becoming Catholic, making peace between them. But Kapoor's son, was like a documented rebelizer. Yeah, he was like, and this is after Kapoor died, right? His son got older, and his son was famous for rallying all these young promoter men. Like, he was a young guy. And he rallied all these young promoter men to be like, what is the fuck is going on? And so there's a story that before the second stood up on the steps of the cathedral with a bunch of other promoters demanding the return of his father's remains. Which I don't think he got. If I'm not mistaken. The record says that he's still, he was there. As a matter of fact, there are people on Guam, I know there's somebody out there, maybe somebody even who's listening, but I know there are people out there who were around when they were renovating the cathedral, and I believe that they uncovered the remains. I don't know if they were removed or whatever happened to them, but my understanding is that he's like buried underneath like what now is the main part of the cathedral, that he's under that part, right? Because that's not it was a smaller structure part. But it's, very, of course, very nuanced, right? You have some promoters who, were friendly with the Spanish, who, thought that it was better to create peace between them. There are others who were just like, nope, we don't have enough. And so, that's the way that I look at Haral's speech, is that it represents a perspective that a lot of other promoters shared. There's obvious, disparity in between the two groups. There's obvious feelings of resentment. There's obvious conflict. And I think it's important because it shows that the promoter people have a very clear sense of self and sense of place. And, they're like a lot of other people were like, this is not right. It's not right for you to just roll up in here on our homeland and just start, doing whatever you want. Just do any time and we're just going to be cool with it. No, that's not it. That won't happen. And so in his last speech, he's encouraging promoters to get up and fight, right? To join him in fighting, like physically fighting the Spanish, going to war with the Spanish. By the way, the Spanish War, when I was a kid, I was taught that, like, Samoas have like, or the Spanish have like the super advanced weaponry and they just annihilated Samoas. I didn't realize until I was older and started doing my own studying and researching that the Samoa-Spanish War lasted 20 years. Isn't that crazy? 20 years. Like a 20-year war. Like that is insane. And the Samoa-Spanish War really came to an end not because Samoa just gave up or didn't want to fight anymore. It came to an end because most, a lot of Samoans died through foreign diseases. Right? People, they have diseases that were introduced to them that they've never seen before and didn't have cures for. And so the small population decimated by disease. And so it's a very interesting history. But definitely a very important history. We got a car. I've been going off enough to date somebody to call me and talk to me. Confidence in that dramatic view on the air. Yes, sir. Yeah, I'm here. How can I help you? Yeah, I think about that really, another interesting thing about the history, right, is that promoters, they disagree with each other. And promoters who, have conflict with each other, some obviously sided with the Spanish and some did not. But yeah, there's still a lot of disagreement between promoters. And it's interesting too, like the history of Macapang, right? Macapang is famous for devoting from the tourists. And I think it's a really interesting thing, like how Komodo, in modern Komodo, right, when you say Macapang means that you're being silly, right? But that's not what that actually means. Like, Macpa is face. And so, it's a really interesting thing when you think about the way the way that Spanish influence has changed Komodo culture and society, and even the way that we view our past and see ourselves even today. Like, nobody uses Macapang in reference now to the chief, right? It's commonly used as slang. And so it's a very interesting thing, but I think what's really important is that, our kids learn about the history of the promoters who came before them. In the Spanish era, of course, in the war, we often, make sure that our kids know about the World War II conflict and the Japanese occupation, but a lot of times our kids don't get the history before that. So thank you, Matt. Thank you for calling in and sharing some of this history with us. And I hope there's something out there. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of historical sites on the way into the land, too. Mm-hmm. So, mm-hmm. Yeah, there are a few sites that are in that Bandung area on the way into the land. Oh, yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of stones in that area. And pottery. There's a lot of pottery. Pottery really interesting. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of great historical sites on Guam, and that's one of the things that I think is kind of an untapped resource for us. Now that tourism is evolving, right, and a lot of people are starting to see the impact of the tourism industry on their communities. A lot of places are kind of moving into this different approach on how we market tourism. And, like our old model is a very, like, YPT model, right? Like, high luxury and shopping, resorts, hotels, all that, right? The beach, the state beach, and you go to Long Beach and that's it. But a lot of the question now is how do we separate ourselves from YPT, right? How do we make tourists choose Guam over Hawaii? And, we're never gonna out YPT. And so now there's a perspective that what we should be doing is we should be really featuring our promoter culture as the thing that attracts people to Guam. And so now there's a lot more interest, in learning the history and experiencing promoter culture and life when you're in Guam rather than just a hotel or a resort or a shopping plaza. And so, I really feel like this is on the horizon for us. If we're serious about cultural tourism, then we have to be serious about our historical sites. And there are so many great historical sites on Guam. There's so many fascinating things to see. There's so much great history. I mean, I always felt like Guam's story. Guam is a 4,000-year-old story. There's so much to talk about. There's so much to learn about. And, it's one of the things that I feel fortunate to be a part of the work at the Department of Promoter Affairs and the Guam Museum because we get a chance to be involved in all of this. But
I remember maybe when you found out that the former government was the news of everything.
So, before Magellan, what?
The promoter before Magellan landed, the promoter, 17.
What about them?
That's what I was
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of, and that's one of the things that I think is important about the Guam Basket collection, right? Is that there are so many items that create interest, that make people want to say, what are these things? I want to see them. I want to learn more about it. I want to understand about that kind of history. And, like a lot of people that I've met since we started doing this work on the Horn Basket collection, they don't even know that these items existed or that the situation occurred. But they're very interested. They want, now that they know that these items are being returned to Guam, there have been a lot of people who have been asking me, okay, when are they coming? And when they come, how do we see them? And I think that's the benefit, right, is that we're sparking interest in a new generation of promoters, a new generation of Guamanians, and helping them to be connected to that history. And I think the history is important. The promoter history is important, not just for promoter people, but anybody who calls this place home and who wants to be, part of this community, a member of this community. It's important for all of us to learn the history of our people and how we came to be, how we found this place. Promoters were the oldest civilization in Micronesia. We settled these islands like 500 years before the next group of Micronesians. And so I think it's a really interesting thing. I remember when I was a kid, I grew up in an era where you were discriminated against for being a little too promoted. And so, we don't always learn the history in the way that I would have liked. But now, I feel like schools are changing. A lot of the history that our kids are learning is different. It's more complete. It's more complex. There's a lot more information that we're getting. And I think that's a good thing. And so I look forward to seeing you when we bring these items home and put them on display. Thank you for your question. I appreciate your time. Thanks for contributing. The number is 671-922-1051 or 1052 if you would like to get involved in the conversation. I got only a few minutes left before the top of the hour. We're going to take a break. When we get back, I want to talk a little bit about waste management as a big, kind of shift jump. But I'm not going to talk about the lawsuit today because I just got back. I apologize I wasn't here last week, Monday. We had some volunteers from the Independence Task Force who agreed to start the show. Thanks to Anastay and I think Josh was on here with her.
Yeah.
Thank you guys in the Independence Task Force for filling in for us and keeping the conversation rolling. But the reason I wasn't here was because I was in Hawaii. I was on my way back from Hawaii because the Bishop Museum held a ceremony to commemorate and celebrate the return of the Lassie and the Hornback collections to Guam. And so basically, I'm going to try to sum this up as much as I can. But after, the Skipper's office was great. Skipper, not Skipper's office, Skipper office. Skipper was great. And they really were the ones who initiated this work with the Bishop Museum. The Bishop Museum staff was fantastic. And I know this is a touchy subject where a lot of people instinctively are upset at Bishop. It's terrible what you guys did to us. There's no doubt about it. It's wrong. And it was very uncomfortable. And it's unacceptable. But, to be fair, there's nobody working at Bishop today that was around when these items were taken. There's nobody here working at Bishop today that, was around when we first started asking for these items to be returned. And to Bishop's credit, I gotta say one awesome thing about Bishop Museum now is that there are way more Hawaiians working at Bishop than there ever have been in the past. And that perspective is really permeated throughout the entire institution. And so, it's also fortunate, of course, that other museums are kind of going back and reflecting and doing their own adjustments, right, to kind of make right with the communities that, maybe have had items taken from them inappropriately. And so the Bishop Museum today has been very committed to the ethical return of these items. And so when we started to engage with Bishop Museum staff and Bishop Museum leadership, there was never an argument. We never had to go in there and say, hey, you guys are wrong, you need to do the right thing. It was more like, we came in and they said, yeah, we know that there's a problem, and we are committed to working with you to make, to right this historical wrong. And so we ended up working with the Bishop Museum staff. They came out to Guam because the hard part for them was they had to basically rebuild the record. Because Juan Bacher was not a real archaeologist. He was not a museologist. He kept very meticulous notes, but a lot of the notes were inaccurate. He didn't speak Komodo, so some of the place names are off, or it's hard to know, what he's talking about because he's making up the Komodo word that doesn't really exist. And so, credit to the Bishop Museum staff for really going, taking the initiative to go and repair the record, complete the record, so that there could be a return. Because no matter what Bishop thinks, right, no matter how they feel about it, they still have a process, a procedure for how to deal with items, right, that are in a collection. So it has to be a step in the collection before they can return it to us. We have to inventory the whole thing and then say, okay, we are taking all of these items out of our collection and we're returning them to Guam, and then these ones will go to Franklin. And so they've been very diligent about that stuff. And they've even been keeping very meticulous records, photos, measurements, everything, you name it. Historical context, awesome. They did a fantastic job, and they've been very cooperative. But one of the great major accomplishments is that last year in December, I went out to the Bishop Museum with Lieutenant Governor Tenorio, and he came so that he could engage with the Bishop Board directly. So we went and we attended a meeting with the Collections and Research Committee, who advises the main board. And then right after that meeting, we went into the board meeting. And so we basically pitched our case twice, right? And one of the things that we asked was for a formal agreement, a written agreement. And so we ended up executing an MOU that committed both sides to the return. But we discovered, because we have this great working relationship with the Bishop Museum, be accepted into the collection, which means that they're not technically a part of the inventory. And that means that they don't have to go to the geocaching process. And so all they had to do was agree, like, yeah, we're going to give these back to you. So we ended up going, I went with the Lieutenant Governor brought me into a meeting with DOD, and we sat with the Rear Admiral and the representatives from the Navy, and we basically, I don't think it was like the best meeting I've ever had in the city. Normally it's like, I gotta get money out, all my facts straight because we're going to get it for an argument. But we walked into our meeting and we're like, all right guys, we're basically asking you to do the right thing here. And I was about to break out the record, like, oh, the history on this thing is clear. And the real was like, oh, we know. We know. Trust me, we know. And we are winning. Whatever you guys need, we're going to do it. We're going to make it work, and we'll make it happen. So they're committed to do an opportunity list. So they're gone. We partnered with Bishop. We did fund the professional packing and trading of the latches so they don't get damaged in transport, and we could get them from Bishop to the dock. But basically, once the military has a vessel that has enough space on it, on its way here, that's what's going to happen. They're going to get loaded up on here, into the ship or airport. They'll get dropped off, or the nuclear latches will get dropped off in Rota, and then the other two will come back again. So this could be planned anywhere as soon as September. The trading will be complete at the end of this month, and we're just waiting on notice from the Navy on when transport will be available. But, it'll be transferred no cost to the people, which is awesome. And so we went to this ceremony to do this, to celebrate this milestone, and it was an awesome thing. It was an awesome thing. Really excited that the Bishop Museum is, making such a deep commitment to this. And also, there's some promoters out who live in Hawaii who I think are having some separation anxiety. Like, oh man, you're taking our latches. Like, bro, these are our latches. They're still yours, but you gotta come home. You know what I'm saying? And it was great too because there are a lot of people who came out, a lot of promoters who came out that were really excited about this because they've been involved in trying to get these things done for the longest time. And it's just an exciting thing that is finally happening. So, anyway, we are at the top of the hour, and we got to take our break. But stay with us. We're going to be back for another hour of political status discussions right after this.
The work actually started Saturday. More than 3,000 flight students will start the journey for the first time since 1985. 700 flights will people Saturday. New contract has been under negotiation for months. The biggest issue over the resolved is pay for being on the ground, being priced, and when passages are boarding. Ready to call CBS News.
Hurricane Aaron's been downgraded to a Category 3 hurricane, but its warning followed his forecast to restrengthen. Forecast for thunderstorms will move right up forth and force hurricanes are possible. He wanted to stop with us because CBS is blaming on the phone. The way for Thursday, splitting the lead out to North Carolina, going right between the two of them, and then out into the North Atlantic, where we need this thing to be. I think these conducted in the airplane vessel were shooting, and it's going to have because 4 people died and 9 others wounded. No one's been arrested. The animal penises appears to be being eliminated. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky wants to provide us tomorrow with him other EU leaders to reach his democracy. Secretary of State Michael Rubio says that he's holding both Russian President Putin and Zelensky must make concessions for a change of peace deal. Now, ultimately, the leadership would be like a great idea of war, because it's unfair and there to be consequences, but we're trying to avoid that, and really trying to avoid those consequences is an even better consequence. What is most joyous about the spirit to one most people and to their dedication? That's the way I'm doing. This today series. So, honestly, played our show in Zero Zone, Superman and Superman 2 were playing in the Lower Green for Larry, the possibly known as the after a 6-5 career, he qualified for the Unsigned Boston and Fuller to receive the Players Fund. At 63-year-old Melvin was severely injured after his appearance by a fourth-class defense in the Bahamas team. And the overtime of the U.S. this afternoon for that series. CBS News. Progressive insurance with insurance for cars, home, boat, motorcycles, RVs, and commercial vehicles at 1-800-PROGRESSIVE and Progressive.com. A couple years ago, I was in the bathroom at the airport and I brought my smartphone to the toilet. Not smart. There's nothing to do with incredibly focused on the job at hand. We're better at saying that along the way, according to Google, 3 million other multitaskers accidentally drop phones into the Google last year. It's also a reminder that right now, getting yourself a brand new Samsung Galaxy A36 absolutely free with a $35 plan for Pure Talk. The A36 comes with crash-resistant Gorilla Glass and powder-rated almost all of them, along with unlimited time to build up an America's most dependable high-speed network. In other words, it's soft and smart. Something simple next time you're multitasking in the next term. Just buy a balancing frequency and keyword micro against a free phone today. You can make the quickest in 10 minutes. That's pound, PCIQ, semi-code switch to an 8% smartphone. That's updated when you're so fast or something. Clear talk. A new documentary on some soldiers about the resistance that cycle is today. It's never over. Something just happens. Time is stable. The time that we're around the world, we are buckled around in 1997 at first. Now, Buckley's voice of Halloween is played on Spotify and averages more than 100,000 times a day. So much already bored with you to convince Buckley's memory before to be made.
His thought, his ability to connect with his listeners on such a deep level.
It's Nathan. What do you think? There's something we can get a whole weapons and try to take it about something. Or do that freaking thing where something foreign that we want to come absolutely know about it too. Weapons with Joe Chicken, Tyler, and Josh Burger taking 25 million people. Now take it. CBS News. Your affordable care and health plan will likely be more expensive next year. I'm Sam White, and this is your tool about how to use Medicare. There are a couple of reasons for the increase. Some insurers want to raise rates because of policy changes and new GOP sponsored budget law. Well, in these Obamacare subsidies expire at the end of the year, and Congress has decided to expand. If they do, most of the 24 million Americans on healthcare plans face double-digit premium increases. Speaking of the big budget law, books funded are coming to Medicaid, the state federal insurance program for people with low incomes and disabilities. In most states, many adults who are without the program have to prove they're working, volunteering, or in school to keep coverage. But it probably won't be easy. Some are losing all the books in Georgia, and it can cost them implement and confusing from enrollees to navigate. Between the two ACA plans getting more expensive, policy experts expect around $15 million in Americans will lose insurance in the next decade. Your thoughts at CareLifePlan.com. Workers are in the move looking for better pay. And their family on the bankrate.com personal finance limit. The new bankrate survey finds nearly half of those in the workforce plan to look for a new job in the next 12 months. That includes 1 in 4 who say they're very likely to look for a new position. This comes at a time when the job market has demonstrated resilience, but it has also continued to cool. Even with the unemployment rate recently slipping to 4.1%, that's considered strong historically speaking. Others plan to do other things to try to improve their own workplace life. 44% of workers say they plan to ask for a raise over the next year. That includes the majority of the youngest people in the workforce, members of Generation Z and millennials. Many workers indicate they're prepared to be mobile, with 18% saying they're likely to relocate for a new job. About 1 in 3 say they're likely to ask for more work flexibility, such as different hours or the ability to work remote or from home. For more, check out bankrate.com. I'm Mark Hammer.
We're using the goal of accepting our artificial host into the other. We do not necessarily get the gender needs of stock managers, but with one of the style media that we were in. As we start to know how to see individual outcomes, we definitely have to participate in the policies to educate the team to learn what to do and don't forget the show being broadcast on about Burger King, the coconut, and I know too on the mic on the website. You can get those in the breakfast hours and their breakfast snack available at IBK Beach. We will welcome everybody to calling for satisfied adults for a second off. And that is the YouTube, as you just heard. See, we're monitoring, we're checking, so make sure you're on our YouTube. That's very 105.1 FM. Let's go ahead and get this show started.
We're live on COD's Instagram. You can find us at Guam COD on Instagram. We're the live feed going. We're also streaming on Wave's YouTube channel. But you can also come to us on the FM frequency, 105.1 FM. And wherever you're tuning in from, thanks for joining us, and thanks for being here. We appreciate you listening and getting involved. If you want to be a part of the conversation, the number is 671-962-1051 or 1052. If you're on the 1051 number, it is WhatsApp capable. So you can WhatsApp your questions, your comments. I'm tracking the Instagram live comments as well. If you have, I can't see the YouTube comments live, but Reese is on it. And Reese totally sends me the message on this nifty little screen. It hooks me up so I can see the question and I can address it as best as possible. But thanks to all of you out there who are tuned in. Thanks to Joe Malik for calling in and sharing some history with us. In the last hour, we were talking about the infamous Wonpat Doctor collection and the exciting ethical return from the Bishop Museum in Hawaii. Keep going. And, I am planning to, I just booked the curator at the Guam Museum. Also trying to get one of the representatives from the Guam Cultural Repository that has been involved in this ongoing work. I'm going to bring them in next week, Monday, so we can take a deeper dive into the Lachi return and Hornbosser collection return. A lot of really exciting things. I'm not gonna give up all the goods just yet. But we just came back from the Lachi return ceremony in Oahu at the Bishop Museum. A really great ceremony. A lot of involvement from our Samoa diaspora and the Kanaka Maoli community in Hawaii. Very exciting work. And the Lachi will be officially created and ready for transport by the end of this month. That's going to be, I believe, they're starting training tomorrow. August 18th was the go time for them, and we're a day ahead. So, Bishop Museum and their contractor will start the professional packing and crating this week, and it should be done in about a week. And then we're just waiting on notice from the Navy when they will be transported on one of their vessels back to Utah and then eventually to Guam. So stay tuned. We're going to be announcing this real soon. First, we're going to have a welcoming ceremony when the Lachi return, and I hope that people will come out to celebrate, but also to pay their respects and reconnect with a very important part of our history. So I want to just show some love to the Guam Pickle, Guam Museum team, Dr. Michael behind the doctor, our administrator, Leona Young, and Oakley over there at the museum, as well as the Guam Cultural Repository curator, Kevin Marsh, and the whole team over there that have been actively working on this, and of course, the staff and leadership of the Bishop Museum as well. So, thanks to all of you who have been involved, and of course, we can't forget our administration and specifically Lieutenant Governor Jackson Arroyo has been instrumental in ensuring that we have the high level support of the Bishop leadership and board as we move forward. So the collection is currently being deassessed now, and actually just signed the transfer agreement. And so it's crazy. Like the transfer agreement has the inventory list. Holy cow, it took me forever to get down to the bottom where I signed. Holy cow, there's so much stuff. 10,000 items there. 10,000, it's going to be insane. But one of the two things, before we shift gears into the next topic, one of the two things that is happening now is that the Bishop Museum has agreed to work with us on executing loans. Loans of these items, and it's really, some people are like, what do you mean you're loaning it to us? They're ours. Okay. You're like, everything is cool. It's for ours. But the reason why we're doing a loan system is because reassessing is going to take some time. And, there's already this big commitment that this is going to happen. It's not if, it's a when. And so what Bishop has agreed to is Bishop Museum agreed that they would work with us on identifying particular items of interest to us and execute loans. So that way we could bring items home, knowing that we're not going to return them. So basically they're loaning it to us, but we're not sending them back. We're basically going to hold on to them and
this is the ultimate tomorrow.
the tomorrows are totally tomorrow.
I mean, we're just thinking about one day.
It's tomorrow by about. Yeah. I'll give you back with this cover, but not this side. There's no tag, but it works. But yeah, so we will, of course, be organizing exhibition of these, mini exhibition. There's only a selected items that have been transported on loan. But, of course, when the full collection returns, there will be more expansive exhibition. And there's a lot of possibilities. I mean, shoot, there's so many Flintstones. We could do a full show on just Flintstones. That's how many there are. That's insane. Of course, there's a lot of great artifacts and fun specimens that we have in our possession at the Guam Museum already. And so the amount of Flintstones that we could display, I'm telling you, Flintstones could be its own thing. It's a really exciting prospect. Anyway, thanks to all the players and workers and leaders involved in this effort. I think it's a fantastic thing. And of course, like we always do, I think the big takeaway for me, especially in the kind of bigger context of self-government, self-determination, decolonization, is that, in this particular instance, Guam is behaving like a sovereign nation. And that's one of the awesome things about the Bishop Museum team, is that they've recognized that NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Repatriation Protection Act, does not protect us as a people because we're a territory. We're not a recognized indigenous people. The Native Hawaiians, of course, are recognized by the federal government. And so, and if this was happening for them, there's a clear protocol framework and policy built on how to ethically return these items. Because by law, by federal law, Native Hawaiians would have a right to have these things returned to them. That's not the case for us because we're a territory. But the cool thing is that the Bishop Museum, because their staff and leadership is, becoming more and more indigenous Hawaiian. These people are like, well, you're an indigenous people just like we are. We think that these principles should be applied to this situation. And so we're going to conduct our business under the spirit of NAGPRA. Even though NAGPRA doesn't apply to you, that's irrelevant. We know that it's the right thing to do, and so we're going to do it. And it's, respect to the Bishop Museum team for taking that stand. But it's a really exciting thing, and this is where doing this work has really made me imagine, if you're not down with decolonization, you're not down with Guam being fully self-governing, I really think you lack imagination. I know it's hard to imagine, but if you really think about what Guam is capable of, you have the capacity to imagine something better for us. Think of the possibilities of that. And when you look at what Guam has been able to accomplish, despite not having a fully self-governing status, this is another way where Guam was behaving self-government. We're over here So we're basically making a deal, right? Partnering with another nation, the Hawaiian nation, and saying, hey, let's work together to get this thing done. And so what are the possibilities? What are the possibilities of Guam partnering with other nations? Guam is to become fully self-governing. And it can happen in any capacity or any of these statuses, right? If Guam is an independent nation, it's pretty straightforward. If Guam is a fully associated nation, but even as a state, if Guam is to become a state, there are states that also handle their own foreign engagement, even though there's still a State Department, right? New York does their own foreign engagement, so does California. And they just work, collaboration with the State Department, so they're in the loop, they know what's going on. They play a role in it, but, ultimately this is state business. And so, nations, fully self-governing nations everywhere do. We work with other nations, other governments, other, institutions to create these partnerships to advance their goals. And so, what is possible? What is possible for the sovereign nation of Guam? Whether that be through a state mechanism within the union, the federal government, whether that be through a compact of free association, or whether that be through an independent nation's constitution. But, there are a lot of possibilities, and I think it's super exciting, to consider what Guam is capable of if we become fully self-governing. That's it. I want to go and shift gears real quick. I already do like 20 minutes. 20 minutes, that's my 20-minute project file. What's up? But I did want to talk a little bit about waste management, recycling, and regional collaboration on Guam. As most of you guys know, waste management is a major issue for Guam. But not just Guam. CNMI, RMI, Palau, FSM, every one of every single one of our islands has a waste management crisis on our hands. And this is not a small thing. I think that everybody should be involved in this, everybody should care about this. I mean, this is something that affects you directly. People complain all the time, we want to take the time, we gotta clean up the park, we've got all kinds of trash everywhere. And, I'm just gonna start here. If you're one of those, it's like, oh, you're gonna blame the promoter, you promote the terrible, there's just dump all your trash everywhere. I have to start that. I have to start that out of that. No. I believe that this is the responsibility of the entire community. But we also have to recognize that this is a different scenario than what our ancestors dealt with in regards to waste. Guam went from being 90% self-sufficient in terms of food pre-World War II to being 90% dependent on imported food post-World War II. So if you think about what we consume on a daily, the vast majority of it is imported. And whatever that be, whether that be food, consumer products, technology, whatever, right? We have all this stuff that we're importing into Guam, and when it, past its usefulness or, capacity or whatever, and we gotta dispose of it, where does it go? It goes to the dump. Because we don't recycle a whole lot on Guam. I think right now Guam recycles aluminum cans for crackers. Crackers, big pieces. I don't think we do glass recycling anymore. We used to do some plastic. Now I know G3 is doing 2s and 5s, but the majority of plastic waste is 1. If you ever look at the bottom of your plastic bottle, there's a little arrow triangle and it has a number in it with 1 through 5. That number refers to the grade of plastic. So the 1s is like all of your, your water bottles and drink bottles and stuff. Single-use containers. Those are usually 1s. Super low-grade plastic. Your 5-gallon water container or your gasoline jug container, those things are usually 5. Like a higher grade plastic, so that when you put chemical in it, it doesn't deteriorate difficult. Obviously 5s are the more high grade plastics, so the way that we recycle them is different versus the men. We don't recycle anyone, as far as I know. I know there was a collection at one point, but I believe those were being shipped out. Um, and this is the same situation in like every island in my community. As you guys I'm sure know, we used to take all our stuff to other dump. And then other dump is still today in litigation. You know, there's like a full lawsuit to shut down the dump, if you get involved, it's just like they just stopped it. It's a trash mountain. And I just went to New Town last weekend because we were driving past it. We went to Leo Palace over the weekend and drove past the trash mountain. And my wife put me on game. I just learned a new term called, it's called a brown site. Yeah, a brown site apparently is a site that it is unsuitable for people to live on or for farming to take place, right? Because underneath that mountain is just garbage. And so you can't build on it, you can't farm on it, it's just trash. Yeah, but it's so bad. God. I hope. I would imagine that when the litigation is complete and the land is eventually returned to us, I would hope that that's where they build a solar farm. I always think solar farms are dumb, guys. I'm not gonna lie. It's my personal opinion. Not dumb in general, but on Guam. On Guam, solar farms, I don't get it. I don't get it. There's only land is finite. There's only so much land on Guam. And obviously we have a lot of needs. You know, we have a lot of needs for housing, for schools, hospital, whatever, right? There's always a need for land. And I just don't get it. I don't get, like, what is the strategy of like taking up all of this land to put solar farms on. You see how solar farm up there? It's crazy. It's crazy how much land that is. You know, like over near Marble Cave, there's so much land. It's just all solar panels. I always think like when you look around Guam, all of these houses got flat roofs. Can they just put the solar panels on top of the roof? On top of buildings? On top of garages?
On top of buildings that are not being used? That's so unbelievable. What do we do?
Yeah. Guam Faith Academy is on game right now. You ever went to Guam Faith Academy? They have, so there was one, this large solar, energy grant from the interior. And they used it to build their solar infrastructure. And one of the cool features that they have is they built these, like, shaded parking structures. They're basically like a overhang, like a canopy for over all of the parking space. And each one is, capped so that you can park in the shade or you can have shelter when it rains. But on top of all of them are solar panels. And then they wire down to, power their lights for security at night in the parking area. And they have charging stations for electric vehicles. And so Guam Faith Academy, shout out to Bill Johnson, who's the moving thinker over there. Faith Academy got a lot of cool stuff going on. Not just solar, but on the solar part, I think it's awesome that these guys are not only collecting solar energy or producing solar energy through their panels, but they also have battery storage cells. And so they actually have this thing wired super smart where everything runs the GPA power. You're not supposed to, even if you have a ton of solar, you're not supposed to you don't want to disconnect from the grid, right? So they still have GPA power tapped in. But what it does is that the solar energy charges their battery, and when there's not enough sunlight, then the GPA power charges their battery. And then the batteries power their facilities. So that way, even you guys have brownout and your refrigerator breaks the gas because inconsistent power voltage into your house, it's going to be a plant killer when you have brownout. And these guys don't ever have that issue because the batteries don't care if you get burning power or if you get low voltage or voltage is just charging the battery. Super smart designer. I hats off to Dr. Zaston for pulling off that brilliant move. But I feel like that's something that can be done intelligently, right? It just takes time. But, I think that Guam is on that track. Guam's commitment to G3, to the Guam Green Growth Program, is really a commitment to sign on to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And this is like an international movement, right? Nations all over the world are asking themselves, how can we be more sustainable? How can we be less reliant on fossil fuels? How can we, create cleaner, more renewable energy? How do we deal with our waste management? How do we have more efficient healthcare systems? How do we eliminate poverty and houselessness? These are all embedded in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And it's obviously troubling, I think, when you look at what's happening in the United States under the Trump administration. There's this reframing of, all of these sustainability efforts. And so I think this is something like Trump doesn't like climate change. He won't say climate change. He says climate resiliency. Yes. All it is rhetoric, right? It's just kind of figure out how to write a grant, how to align yourself with their priorities. But that's the interesting thing, right? Is that it's not, yes, it is taking money away from a lot of really critical things and diverting them to other things. But, Trump's administration, the federal government is still funding certain initiatives that are, sustainability related. Like there's still an energy grant out there going on under the Trump administration. There's just different kind of perspective on how you qualify for it, or how you, what projects are gonna get funded or what aren't. So I think that that's a big part of the strategy, right? Is that we all gotta figure out how to adjust. And it's tough, especially for U.S. territories, because all of us are islands, right? Guam, American Samoa, U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and even the CNMI, who's the Commonwealth. We all are disproportionately affected by climate change. We all are disproportionately affected by waste management or by lack of recycling infrastructure. And so the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because there's been some major challenges for Guam. There's been some really cool advancements, but I think that there's just so many cool possibilities for the way that we could solve this problem for our community and for our region. Most of you, I'm sure, are aware of Guam Solid Waste Authority. Used to be like fully government run. Ended up, GSWA was created through Public Law 31-20 as an autonomous public corporation on April 4, 2011. When it was established, it was mandated to handle the operations of what was formerly the Solid Waste Management Division that was under DPW, Department of Public Works. Now, of course, I'm sure a lot of you are aware that there was full lawsuit, the dump was in receivership, states had to weigh on it. A big part of this, too, was that, the Navy was utilizing Orbit dump as well, and they're still utilizing the dump. And so, the feds had to pony up. Had to kind of figure out, how do we help fix this problem that we had a hand in creating. And so, since the creation of GSWA, whose mission is to provide a safe and healthy environment for the people of Guam. This is their data here. GSWA's mission to provide a safe and healthy environment for the people of Guam through proper, timely, and efficient collection of refuse materials throughout the villages and urban areas and to ensure their disposal in legally permitted facilities. Now, right now, that is primarily landfill in Luzon. Right? If you've ever been down to Luzon, this one hits close to home for me, literally. Where we stay. But if you go into Luzon and you see the site, right, where the dump is, they basically were digging cells, like, these big pits, and then, it taps at a certain size and capacity, and when it's full, they move on to another boiler where it pumps that money. So the inside is like supposed to be lined so that it prevents any, toxic waste from seeping into the groundwater. And the whole issue, I think it was personally, I was against the dam as the site for the dam for a long time. But it's kind of the disadvantage, the reality if you live down south, you're out of sight, out of mind. So it's the painful, ugly truth that, people down south, just gotta accept that that's how we're looked at and that's how we're treated. It's sucks. But, the people up there also have to deal with this and they aren't down south. But again, out of sight, out of mind, right? Way in there in orbit. Most people never even went into their own. They have no idea how bad it is, how bad it got. But if we well exceeded the capacity of orbit way before its predicted lifespan was supposed to exceed capacity, what more for Luzon? We haven't really changed our impact in terms of decreasing the amount of waste that's going into the landfill, but we've also seen our population explode. And so, of course, the amount of waste has responded accordingly. And so, right now, under GSWA, the services offered are curbside trash collection, curbside recycling collection, bulky waste collection, residential transfer stations, household hazardous waste facility, trailer-only transfer station, and of course the Luzon landfill. All of these things are really just going into the zone. Even for the recycling, I'm not sure how it's working, but we don't have a recycling infrastructure on Guam. It's impossible that all of these recyclables or qualified recyclables are actually being recycled. I'm sure there are some things that are being recycled, but we're not effectively recycling 100% of what could be recycled, which obviously can make a huge impact. There are some alarming demographics. For residential customers, there are 21,264 of them. 42 commercial customers and 49 government customers. That's a lot of collections that are being handled weekly, right? If you know, right, every village has their own day where your trash is picked up. There's been a lot of conversation about making it mandatory, like every house has to have the trash pickup. And it's a double-edged sword. There are some people that are really for it, some people really against it. I mean, no matter where you stand on this, we all still agree that waste management is a problem and a challenge on them. And we've got to do something about it. We've got to figure out a way to handle it. The municipal solid waste landfill as of 2023, there have been 111,126 tons within the Guam landfill. That's crazy. Crazy. The initial measurement in 2012 was 87,761.8 tons within the zone. That means that the tonnage growth rate from 2012 to 2023 is 23,364 tons. That's crazy. In that short amount of time, that's how much we've grown in waste. And these are like everyday items that are used and discarded by the public. Guam is currently working to clean out the 23-acre oil landfill. And this is the primary landfill that was deemed hazardous and closed in 2011. Oil became the subject of environmental scrutiny and enforcement action under U.S. EPA over the Clean Water Act violations, leading to its closure and federal receivership over the island solid waste management operations in 2011. As part of the court order and closure, post-closure care was necessitated. The vent was capped, and multiple monitoring measures were installed to ensure the closure is carried out by monitoring and frequent inspections, maintenance and proper procedure reporting, financial assurance, and post-closure care certification. Upon the issuance of Guam EPA's notice of decision on January 14th of 2022, the post-closure care plan certification will be accepted and presented to the U.S. District Court for consideration to formally end the Grossman, Brickner, and Blackman, or GBB, over the dam. So we're still not done with ordered dam. But, it's something that I think is predictable in terms of what it's going to look, what we can expect with the dam. And so I think it's important, right, that we take a proactive stance, that there's just no changing that we're going to produce waste. It's just a reality. But there's got to be a better way for us to decrease the amount of waste without just saying, oh, we're just going to stop importing stuff. That's just never going to happen. It's not possible. And so, recycling, extensive recycling, it could be a very aggressive move for them, which I really believe can have a great impact on the entire region. When I look at one of the key initiatives, the key initiative addressing Guam's municipal solid waste, which is eliminating single-use plastic waste. So there was a public lab 34-110, Luna Object Plastic Act of 2018, which is a plastic bag ban. It bans all distribution of plastic carryout bags at the point of sale, retailers and wholesalers, which became effective January 1, 2022. GEPA is responsible for the implementation and enforcement. Violators can be penalized with fines. First offense, not to exceed $500. Second offense, not to exceed $1,000. Any offense thereafter during a year period, not to exceed $10,000. Obviously, this is not everybody's following this. Enforcement definitely could be ramped up, but again, another double-edged sword, right? EPA assassination is being squashed under Trump. Our EPA is 100% federally funded, which is crazy if you think about it. Like, EPA is supposed to be like our front line in terms of the environment. And when one of the biggest violators is the federal government through DOD, how is EPA going to be empowered if it's kind of at the whim of federal spending priorities? Recycling obviously is one of the major pieces. Recycling material was about 38.5% of recycled material was diverted from the landfill as of 2023. The initial measurement in 2012 was 28.1, so we've been doing great. That's about a 10% jump. And that is commendable. Hats off to you, John. Good job. Good job, John, for recycling your stuff. But nonetheless, right, like, we've got to be able to do better than 38%. I think the closest we can get to 100% is where it's at. And it's got to be possible. There's a lot of advancement in technology. The G3 Circular Economy Makerspace, which is down at the Promoter Village, they are collecting twos and fives. So you got twos and fives, plastic recyclables. You can, if you wash them, delabel them, you can bring them down to G3 of the Makerspace. And what they're doing is that they're shredding the plastic down and then using it to make marketable products. So that's some cool concepts going on. Like, I know they just started refurbishing school desks. School desks that have like the compressed wood top, and once it like gets a little wet or humid, it starts to like expand and they're like balloons and gets all wet and messed up and it goes off eventually like a corkboard. Those dust suck. So those dust sounds the kid is crazy. Anyways, a lot of the frames of those desks are still good, but the tabletop is flat. And so one of the projects is that they're shaping the plastic to those exact dimensions and then installing them and refurbishing these desks so that we're not just junking the whole thing, you know what I mean? And if you ever worked in a school, you ever seen a school volunteer at school when they're doing like the spray painting, no. The stack of dust stuff is staggering. And if you've ever seen it, a lot of those desks could be salvaged if we just had a tabletop for it, like a frame for it. Just a little paint job, sand down the grass and good to go. So that's one of the cool projects GC is working on. I know they're trying to get the prototype inspected and approved so that they can start working with schools to, get all of the count of how many vaccine new tabletops and to start manufacturing them out of this money, which is super cool. Of course, illegal dumping is a recurring issue for Guam. There's been so much variety of illegal dumping and waste, everything from derelict vehicles, white goods, to litter in the streets and beaches and public areas. These institutions like the Island Beautification Task Force and G3 are steps in the right direction, but then there definitely needs to be a more policy-related approach to it. And this is the tying back to decolonization. My belief is that we cannot respect policy in regards to sustainability and waste if we're not self-governing. Being self-governing empowers us to take a stance in a way that's right for us and our community and the context of our situation and our history, and of course our values as a community. And so, I think a great kind of example of this at a high level, right, is that one of the major things that's happened internationally is that when Trump took office, he pulled out the United States from the Paris Accords. Paris Accords are, part of this global address sustainability and climate change. And so, a lot of these nations who sign on to the Paris Accords are agreeing that they're going to take a proactive stance on clean, renewable energy. And so, when the United States pulled out of the Paris Accords, basically the United States saying, like, yeah, we're not down with climate change. We don't want to, we're not going to sign off, we're not going to cooperate. We're going to do whatever we do, you guys can do whatever you do, but stop bothering us. Now, the real interesting thing about this is that even though the Trump administration pulled the United States out of the Paris Accords, there are certain Guam is still a part of the Paris Accords because we're part of the U.S. Climate Alliance. And the U.S. Climate Alliance is really led by the Democratic states. So both the Democratic states got together and they're just like, look, we don't care what the president says. We're down with this. And we acknowledge this is important. We want in on the Paris Accords. And so, of course, if Guam was not a territory, if Guam was a state, then we would be, like we are now, lumped in with the U.S. Climate Alliance. If Guam was a free associated nation, then that's our prerogative to be on board with these, climate policies and alliances. Same thing if we're an independent nation. And so, when I look at waste management and self-government for the region, I can't help but imagine that this problem can be solved collectively as a region. Not just Guam, but everybody in Micronesia. And, all it really takes is the investment and commitment and partnership. But, Guam is, I can imagine if Guam was sovereign, through whatever mechanism, right? Whether that meant you were a state or you were free associated or independent work. If Guam was sovereign, and the CNMI was sovereign, alongside of course our sovereign neighbors and RMI, FSM, Palau, that represents a sovereign Micronesian nation, right? And if we were to come together and say, okay guys, how can we make this work? How can we all kind of partner and figure out a way to solve this? And one of the cool concepts that I've seen out there is there's this, I'm sure you know about this, the diffusion brick. You heard about this? It's basically like, there's this company that does this, they take any grade of plastic trash, and they basically like flood it, melt it down or something, they treat it or whatever. And then they mold it into a brick. It looks like a hologram. Like a Lego hologram, it looks like a little digit on the top, and they fit together. And apparently, the diffusion brick can process the plastic, like melt it down with zero emissions or minimal emissions, and turn it into a brick that can be used for construction. And supposedly, it's just as strong and durable as concrete, but it is not prone to like deterioration the way that now, even in Guam, like concrete eventually starts to like break down. Yeah, this stuff is not. And you can use it just like you would use a hologram. It's super interesting. Apparently it's a steep investment. Like I hear it's like upwards of $5 million to invest in a facility on Guam. But, my thing is, there's, in the past, there were people who explored, like, what if we were to step out our plastic waste? Like, maybe we don't have a facility, but what if we were to, like, give it to another nation that does have a facility and they want the waste? But I think the challenge with that one was that we didn't have the volume that would make it worth it to run a barge like every month and transport that stuff. But I think that if you look at all of our neighbors in Micronesia, every single one of them is struggling with what to do with their waste. And if we could eliminate plastic, I say Guam should invest in it. That's my personal opinion. If Guam is to invest in this, biofusion brick product and facility infrastructure, and then we were to partner with all of our neighbors in Micronesia and say, hey, you guys got plastic waste? We'll take it. And we run, inter-island drives. Ship all of that plastic, go to all the islands, pick up all that plastic waste, bring it all back home to Guam. We treat it, we get the bricks, and we use that for construction. It's always a challenge to bring materials, construction materials into Guam. If we could eliminate that one thing and have, like, an endless supply of plastic bricks that are just as strong and durable as concrete, I mean, how does that change things? I imagine that's got to be cooler. Like, if your house is built out of plastic instead of concrete, it's got to be cooler. I think so. I don't think it would absorb as much heat. Concrete gets hot. Like, if you're concrete, you walk out on your carpet, your driveway, like midday, you better have some serious cover kind of thing, Tom. That's like, you can put food on that. But I imagine plastic doesn't absorb as much heat. And if it's more immune to sun sprays, it feels like a no-brainer for me, man. But, there's a lot, I think, to consider. And there are a lot of other opportunities. Like Palau right now is already doing glass recycling. As far as I know, we don't have glass recycling on ground. But, see, man, if you ever been to Fiesta, you know how much glass you consume. You go out to the bar and they're closing the bar and they're like dumping the trash bin full of glass. I mean, it's significant. What if we're shipping all of that glass waste out to Palau and giving them more raw product that they could use to, turn around and build with and create with? I mean, there's got to be, I feel like there's solutions, And we don't have the same kind of infrastructure like the States. Like, if you notice that all these bottles say, like, redeem me 5 cents, and they list the states where you can do it, or the states where you can't. But that's an incentive, right? The reason why they do it like that is to incentivize people to say, hey, look, these cans, I know you think they're trash, but they have value, you can get money for it. Peggy Denny, bless Peggy Denny's heart. If you're out there and you know Peggy Denny, or if you Peggy Denny, give her a hug. Give her a hug and just say thank you. I'm going to nominate Peggy Denny for, like, the Medal Party Award. For real. As far as I'm concerned, Peggy Denny is one of us. She's like an honorary promoter in my book. Peggy Denny has been running this recycle program for years. And that's her feedback. Is like, let me collect all of these cans, and we're going to recycle them, and the money's going to go to school. That's what's for Peggy Denny. If Peggy Denny does nothing else for the community for the rest of her life, she's still going to I'm telling you. Peggy Denny is a real one. The shelter does like the waste management, like large events and gatherings where she has a whole crew out there, like separating food waste, separating plastic, separating compostables, so they can divert all of the food waste to the pig farmers, feed their pigs. All the compostables go into, compost piles to break down, single-use plastic separated, aluminum recycled, glass separated. I mean, it's a dirty job, and nobody want to do it except Peggy Denny. But this is something that I think we can solve. Like, so many kids, you can't graduate from a public high school without service money. I say let's get that further from it out there, dealing with waste management. I mean, there are mechanisms or ways that we can all get involved and we can all participate and we all have a positive impact. But again, like, you look at like the effort by recycle, where is that recycling effort without the personal drive initiative of this one woman who's rallying all of these other people? What does it look like if, there's a government commitment to this, an island-wide commitment to this? We all agree that this is important. And yet, nations are doing this all the time. Like, for example, Palau. Have you ever been to Palau? Palau has a green team. You know why they got that? Because they're sovereign. And they can do that. And they can institute a green fee. Basically, if you go to Palau, you have to put aside, put aside like $50 or 100. I think it's $100 now. It's close to 100. You got to put aside $100 twice, and you got to fork it out when you leave. If you want to leave, you got to pay this money, and it's a green fee. And that's the whole thing. Is that money, day by day, that money is how they pay to handle all of their, sustainability, waste management, preservation, whatever. And that's their call. I always think about this with Guam. Guam has broke the million mark on tourism several times. If we were charging $100 per tourist, $100 million to invest in our recycling program, holy wow. I mean, come on, man. It's super possible. It's super possible. And to me, that's the benefit of self-government. That's the benefit of being sovereign. It's the benefit of being in the driver's seat and being able to say, this is what's important to us. This is what we want to accomplish, how we want to accomplish it. We can identify all of the partners that we want. We can work with whomever we want. I mean, Taiwan is a hot stick and a jump away. Don't tell me that there's no opportunities for us to partner with a country like Taiwan that has made major strides in the industry development to help us to develop our own industry, recycling industry. Recycling is a real industry. We could literally, it's two birds with one stone. We're over here, making a huge dent on the influx of waste into the landfill and simultaneously turning around and creating products that have a value. And whatever that is, maybe that's not the bifusion brick, but there's got to be other technology out there that will allow us to utilize this waste, reuse this waste in a way that impacts our community in a positive. I mean, it's got to be possible. I need to get one of these. I need to get a recycling note up in here, Grace. I need to call my wife and be like, who is the recycling node that is going to come and fill in all these jobs so I can just do my big idea thing and be like, actually, there is a mechanism. I need me a recycling node, guys. You got a recycling node there, I mean, 922-1051 or 1052. I want to talk to you. I want to learn more. I think it's a super exciting thing. I just can't help but feel like there's so many possibilities and so many potential partners that are, that can work with us. Just to share with you, there are some formal recycling initiatives in the Pacific developing member countries. I just wanted to share some of the stuff that we got. Like, for example, in the Cook Islands, they recycle metal, paper, plastic, glass, and others. What they don't do is green waste. Fiji does green waste, metal, paper, plastic, and others, but not bamboo. Kiribati does metal, plastic, and others. The Micros does green waste, metal, plastic, and others. Kiswai, metal, plastic, glass. Tempe, only metal. Nauru, only green waste. Palau, here's the winner. Palau does it all. Green waste, metal, paper, plastic, glass, and others. Ceylon, Palau. No Ceylon. For setting the example, I love you, Palau. All my Palau friends, you know I'm joking. You know it, but I love you guys. Now props for those guys. when I look at what other islands are doing, these are not like super large, affluent island nations. They're nations that are working with what they've got and finding creative solutions. But I think that there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of potential, and just like most things, the way that we're going to solve this is partnership, collaboration. You know, separated, we're small island nations. Unified, we're the blue continent, the biggest nation in the world. And there's already this perspective that Pacific Islands need to, unite and partner and stand with each other on initiatives like these. So, super exciting work. A lot to be talked about, and I totally just burned through this last hour. So I'm going to have to do another show. I'm going to go in there and find me a recycling nerd, and like a sustainability expert, and we're going to test that. I'm just going to make time for me here. Kyle, get in here, Kyle. Kyle, my wife. My wife got the framework. Let me see that data, hon. I need to see that data. But the framework is there, by the way, if you are interested in seeing what Guam has been up to in regards to sustainability. G3 is the largest public-private partnership toward advancing the sustainable development goals for Guam. So, a lot of cool things. Definitely, there are a lot of great things that we could do better, do more of, but a lot of cool stuff that is happening now. So, thanks to everybody who is actively, deliberately working towards the attainment of these sustainable development goals. Anybody out there who's got their own home garden, or you're composting, or you are, like a massing specialist, you need to work for it. Massing. That's right. Massing is anything that you can reuse. Right? A tanky is massing. Used to carry oil, but now it's a barbecue pit. Your washing drum used to wash your clothes, but when your machine broke, you pulled it out, and now it's a plastic. That is massive, my friends. See? This isn't culturally appropriate. I could do this all day, but unfortunately, my time has come. So, thanks everyone for tuning in to Challenge the Status Quo, brought to you by the Commission on Decolonization and our friends over at Glimpses Media. My name is Melvin, Wonpat, Borja. I've been happy to have this discussion with you. Thanks to Joe Malik, my one and only caller. I appreciate you tuning in. Thanks to everyone out there in Radio Land, on our Instagram Live, and on our YouTube stream. We will be back next week, Monday, 10 to noon. I hope to hear from you then. Have a great week, everyone. Adios.